So again, you can take a look in your program at the bios, and I won't read those, but I would like to first introduce our colleague Adrienne Bolden, who is a member of the PRSSA National Board and VP of Diversity and Inclusion for PRSSA, and is a student at Florida International University, where she's completing her master's degree. We were in touch the other day, and she told me that she will be receiving very soon the highest honor at graduation, the World's Ahead Award. So congratulations.
Thank you.
We're thrilled to have you here. The next panelist is LaKesha Brown. LaKesha is a corporate communications and public affairs manager at American Airlines, the world's largest airline, which I didn't realize until I researched you. And it serves over 200 million customers each year with 6,700 flights to 250 destinations, right? Mm-hmm. So welcome, LaKesha.
Thank you.
And last but not least is our new addition, and this is why you don't have her bio in the program, but many of you probably know her because she has served on the Plank board for a number of years. This is Alicia Thompson, who most recently was the VP of Communications at Edible Arrangements in the Atlanta area. Prior to that, she had worked in a number of both corporate and agency roles, including the agency roles she told me were Edelman and Porter Novelli. Mm-hmm. So welcome, Alicia, and thank you for stepping in. So with that, I want to start with a series of questions, and we want to keep this as fluid as possible, so we will save enough time at the end for questions, but if you have something burning while we're having our chat that you'd like to ask in the moment, please do that. So why don't we start with, how did you first get involved in diversity and inclusion? Was this something that's always been a passion of yours, or is it something that was part of a job, or how did you first get involved in that? And we'll start with you.
Okay. So again, I'm Adrienne Bolden. I'm originally from Memphis, Tennessee, but I am in Miami, Florida. This weather is too cold. So I just naturally was involved in D&I. I've always taken up for people who maybe couldn't take up for themselves. Being an African-American woman and a Native American, I've always just advocated for being fair across the board. So specifically, how did I get into this role? I've worked for a number of programs. Some of you may be familiar with AmeriCorps. That's a program that's about engaging the community, things like that. And so when this role came about, I asked two presidents of HBCUs who are also a part of PRSSA to apply, and they were like, no, I don't feel comfortable. I don't want to do it. And I'm like, all you have to do is just fill out the application and throw it in. I said, watch me, I'm going to do it. I threw it in. I didn't expect to get the role because I was just trying to tell them to do it. But obviously, I've had 8 years of business management experience, and so I'm happy to be here, happy to create that pathway for others to follow.
Great, thank you.
All right, I'll try to make this a little quick. So for me, D&I started in my collegiate career. I was one of the writers for the college newspaper, realized that the African Americans on campus didn't have a voice. We were about 5% on campus. So I started the first publication on campus geared towards the African American students until the provost told me to stop. So that's where that started. But in my 18-plus year career in corporate America, I've always done D&I. It started with Blockbuster years ago. And Blockbuster promoted their first openly gay female executive, who then became the chief of diversity. And so she wanted me to be her advisor, where we advised the C-suite on diversity initiatives. That's when diversity was really hot. Fast forward, now I'm at American, and you know, we had a discussion very early that if I'm on a panel, I'm going to keep it real. So I didn't start at American to do D&I work. I started to just do the public relations, the public affairs piece of it. And then we had a public incident in October 2017 that some of you may be aware of, that thrust us in the spotlight about a passenger who had an unfortunate situation that occurred on one of our flights. And then I was asked to jump in and be a part of our D&I efforts at American.
So like many of you in this room, I've always been the first, the only, or one of a few.
Yep.
So when you have a history like that, D&I is always
Yep.
centered in your life. And it became more so as I actually started to move into leadership roles in organizations because I had to be the voice
Yep.
for everybody else. And so I come at D&I slightly differently because I was thrust into it in the roles that I had. So mine actually came through because of jobs.
Okay, thank you. It's interesting, when we had the prep call, and again, we'd like to thank Nilanjana for pulling us all together remotely since we're all located all over the country to prepare for today. It was very interesting when LaKesha shared some of what American had gone through. And, you know, all too often it seems like companies get serious about this area when they're under fire, when they have an issue. Has that been the experience of people in the audience, especially those of you who work in corporate environments, perhaps? That nobody really, maybe you talk about it, but nobody really does anything until such time that you're pushed up against the wall and you need to start doing something. So, you know, that's been something that hopefully companies are getting past. But I think, you know, there have been examples in the news even the last couple of weeks where companies have had some missteps and have needed to get much more serious about this. I would like the panel to share with us now some of the success stories you have. I mean, obviously, you all have success stories. Hopefully, many of the people in the audience have success stories. But when D&I is done right and done well, what has been your experience? And maybe give us a little background as to what that was and what the end result of that initiative was. Alicia, why don't we start with you?
So I have to admit, when I got the questions and this one popped up, I was like, oh, wow. Nothing immediately came to mind, which is unfortunate. It's very unfortunate. I've had a 27-year career in PR and nothing immediately came to mind in that nanosecond. But I did come to the conclusion, I did work for Edelman for a period of time. I ran the Atlanta office, and Edelman has a very unique employee network. They have 6 different groups: African American, Latino, veterans, LGBT, women, and Asian. Did I get all 6? Yay. And you know, every organization has employee networks today, but I think it was interesting when Dean was talking about the intersectionality. One of the unique things about Edelman's program is that each of the networks actually do interact and engage, and they're not just to create a sense of community for those individuals within the organization. They actually are groups that help to educate across the network about those individual groups. And where it worked really well, oddly enough, this will tell you when I was in Edelman, was when the Pulse shooting happened in Orlando. Our LGBTQ group, Edelman Equal, actually was an amazing resource for educating across the network about why this was so important, not just to the LGBTQ community, but to all communities. And they were a voice within the organization, and they led discussions in various offices. And so it was really interesting to see how what had been initially maybe created as a subset group just to create a sense of community for a group of employees actually had a significant impact. Same thing with Edelman Griot, which is the African American group. When all of the shootings, the police shootings of African Americans started to happen, they led the voice. They had conversations with leadership about creating safe rooms where people could go and just have a moment to grieve or to be angry or whatever needed to happen. And so I think it's a very interesting approach to how you actually leverage employee networks more extensively than just creating a mini subset of employees that gives them a space to feel comfortable with people like them. So.
Yeah, thank you. My experience at one company, not where I'm at right now because we're just starting this work, but was that when the groups were formed initially, they were almost competitive against each other because they were doing Martin Luther King Day celebration, or they were doing Gay Pride, and it got to a point where we finally got all the groups together, and I think we had 8 or 9 groups. I was the executive sponsor of people living with disabilities, and I thought when I got there they would put me in charge of the LGBTQ group, but they purposely put the members of the management committee with a group that they weren't part of, which I thought was brilliant because it taught us a lot about people that were different than we were. But what we started to do towards the end of my time there before I left to take the job I have now was to bring these groups together on a very frequent basis, because to the point that was made by the earlier panel, how do you know if you should belong to the African American group, the women's group, the LGBT? I mean, I knew one woman that belonged to 6 different groups. And I said to her, do you have time to do your job? Because all she was doing was going to these employee resource groups. But I think that this kind of consortium, if you will, of these groups that we put together really started the dialogue and started to show that these groups were all pulling in the same direction. That same company, and then I'll have the panel share some other examples with you. At this same company, we had a situation where we were owned by a Japanese company. We were based in Tokyo, but I worked out of the headquarters just north of here. And I know Sandy's here, who works for a Japanese company. If you work for a multinational company like that, especially one that is not based in the US, diversity and inclusion means something completely different. So in Japan, for example, our big effort in Tokyo was mainly on women, because even in this day and age, for those of you who haven't worked for a Japanese company before, many women, when they're growing up, make a decision between going to school and having a career or having a family. Even in this day and age, even in the year 2019, you don't find a lot of working women, especially at senior levels, in Japan. So that's where we started. So, that was one of my learnings, not only with the affinity groups, but with just this area in particular. One size does not fit all. What worked for us in the suburbs of Chicago would have bombed and would have probably been more disruptive than helpful if we had tried to do the same things in Tokyo. I now work for an Irish-based company, and it's interesting that in many ways Ireland is way ahead of the United States, especially now. We're kind of taking some steps back, and I won't go into my thoughts about that, but it's very interesting to see in the Irish headquarters how progressive a lot of the things have become, and that's only been in the last few years. So LaKesha, I'd love to hear. I know you've got all kinds of examples.
I'll try to keep it short. D&I is a journey. It's not a destination. I mean, it's lifelong commitment. What I will say from my experience at American is that after we had some public incidents, it really made the corporate communications department, media relations department at American is about 100 people. And what it made us do was come together as a team and actually have really frank discussions about why we failed in certain areas of public relations as it related to diversity and inclusion. To the point, we've done a good job on diversity, but we're not doing a really good job in inclusion. And we realized that within our own department, because everybody didn't feel like they belonged. Everybody didn't feel like they had a seat at the table. And so within our team, it just now, what I would say is a journey. I wouldn't give us an A+, because I just think there's always room for improvement, is that now we're more purposeful in our interactions with each other, and when there are things that are coming up, D&I being top of mind, being a part of the culture, being a part of the lens in which you look at your work, and the storytelling is where we won, because I think it was Dean's presentation where he talked about a lot of the literature is the website, it's the recruitment aspects of it, and what we had to take is look at our own communications, our press releases, our team stories, and realize they weren't as diverse as they needed to be. And so I would say that is something that I'm proud that our department has really been intentional in our D&I efforts. And because we're the moral compass of American, right, that has spread out to the organization. And another plug that I like to say is that our leadership now is very much more self-aware. And they're holding themselves very much accountable. And, you know, there's a book I recommend, it's called Hard Landing. It talks about the aviation industry and just the origin of it. If you read that, you know, it really tells you that the aviation industry as a whole had a D&I issue at the very beginning because of how it came to be. It was mainly white males with major egos. When you think about, you know, flying in the air, it takes a huge ego to think that you can do that. So it's a journey. We're invigorated by it, we're hopeful, and we want the public to hold us accountable when we don't do right.
Great. I'd love to hear how you got your leadership, your management, not only more aware of what needed to be done, but engaged and involved.
When you have a board of directors that will hold you accountable, that's where it started. When we had our issue, Doug Parker has been very open and honest about not really at first accepting the fact that perhaps American had a issue as it related to diversity and inclusion. And when your board is diverse, it helps. And he had a member of the board that pulled him to the side and said, this is an opportunity to learn. Don't be defensive and listen, because while you may think that you're one way, as the leadership and the research has shown, leaders don't really have a real clue, right? And he listened, and that was him becoming aware of his own bias and his own blind spots, and that has helped him. And he has grown as a man, and he has grown as a leader, and it's been really nice to see, because there's a vulnerability that I see is really his strength as a leader.
That's great. And Adrienne?
So for me, I'm very thankful for my role, and because I had the opportunity, what I decided to do was create the subcommittee, because I didn't just want it to be one person out here championing D&I. So I have 7 members on my subcommittee, and one of my members are here. It's Gianna. She's actually one of the award recipients. And then I do have another member that will be joining us. She is the vice president of the the president of HB PRSSA, Janice. So, thank you. So what I've done in my role is just keep expanding, keep extending those opportunities to other students. So in total, we'll have about 10 people sitting on the subcommittee. I do have international students as well, so we're representing Peru, Argentina, help me Nick. Nick is here, he's our president, Colombia, and Puerto Rico. So my goal has been to just extend that opportunity, to make sure I'm not the only person at the table. I do not have 6 groups that I can be a part of. I can only do 2. So it's really important that you build on more people and that you just keep extending those opportunities. One thing that does work, and I want to say this, I graduated from Howard University for my undergrad, and as you know, they had a partnership with Google. They did a residency, and now they had expanded to HBCUs and ACUs. So I would encourage companies to maybe create residencies for students where they're able to come and, more than an internship, to really get immersed in that work and be able to take that back. And you get to see diverse talent, but they also get to see your company and how you actually do have that retention and that onboarding for diverse candidates.
That's great, thank you. So we've kind of touched on the employee resource groups, affinity groups, whatever the name is at any given company. And I would like to spend a little more time with the panel about their experiences and some things that may have worked, things that may not have worked. But to kick it off, I'll share with you a very real story, a very concrete story of where they made a huge difference, not only within the company, but within the state that we were located in. This is when I was heading up global communications at Eli Lilly and Company. And for those of you who don't know, Eli Lilly's headquarters is in Indianapolis, Indiana. And when I was there, our Vice President Pence was the governor. And some of you may remember what was going on in the state with marriage equality. And when Jim, my partner who's here, and I first moved to Indianapolis, we literally had people pull us aside and tell us not to go more than a half hour outside of Indianapolis, or we were going to be targets of hate crimes, which, coming from the East Coast, we were just shocked. But, fortunately, we didn't have any incidences, but that was the kind of environment that was happening. And it's sad to say we still have states, and probably Indiana still has some of that going on right now. But marriage equality was up for a vote. And because of the opposition, especially the governor, it wasn't looking really great about getting this passed in the state of Indiana. And so the LGBTQ group at Lilly, which was a couple hundred people, Lilly's a big company, as Ron knows, because he used to work there too, really galvanized and became extremely active, extremely vocal. We went and testified before the lawmakers in Indianapolis. We also worked very closely with a lot of the other LGBTQ groups at other big companies in Indiana, like Cummins and Anthem and some of the other groups. And ultimately, and we heard this from a number of the representatives that we were working with, that they honestly believe that by hearing the real life stories that each of us told, it made a difference, and it eventually was passed. Again, it's something that there's still a lot of work to do, but when you see a person standing up in front of a lawmaking body telling their very painful story about their journey and what they've encountered throughout their life and throughout their career, it gets people's attention. I mean, we're basically, as communications people, we're storytellers. We're responsible for developing the narrative of our companies. But one thing I haven't seen us do as well yet, and I think it's starting to change, is developing our own narrative, because our own individual narratives will always be much stronger and much more convincing than the narrative of any given company or organization. So it's a matter of being vulnerable. It's a matter of being comfortable in your own skin. And I know, it took me many years to get to the point where I'm now. And I still have work to do, but we have a responsibility to make sure that people know who we are above and beyond just what our job is in any given company. So I'd love to hear more. Alicia, you mentioned what the Edelman LGBT groups had done during the Pulse shootings. Are there any other examples of how any of your employers had tapped into the employee resource groups, whether it was for internal or external benefit?
Yes, so I actually worked for Popeyes, not Chicken and Biscuits, Louisiana Kitchen, for about almost 10 years. And oddly enough, it's an interesting culture because though based in Atlanta, it was founded in New Orleans, and about 75% of our employees were from New Orleans. They had relocated to Atlanta. Now, any of you that have been to New Orleans, you know it's a very special culture. It's a very unique place, and the people that are born and bred in New Orleans are a very special group of people. So to relocate them to Atlanta was quite a challenge, and to actually get them to embrace the new culture of Popeyes was even more difficult. So we actually, oddly enough, started a resource group just for the Louisiana natives, which is odd if you consider the company background and how most resource groups form. But it was really to start to transition how they thought about the business and thought about living in Atlanta. We did Atlanta outings to show them that it was as amazing a city as New Orleans. I don't know that we really truly ever convinced them of that, but we made every effort. And oddly enough, when RBI, which owns Burger King and Tim Hortons, acquired Popeyes 2 years ago, I think it was, maybe 2 years ago, only 3% of the original employees returned to New Orleans.
Oh, wow.
So we considered that a success. I wasn't with the company at that time, but I talked to the CEO, and she was like, only 3% of the people went back to New Orleans, and we considered that a success, that we had actually persuaded them that Atlanta was a great place to reset roots, reestablish family, et cetera. So it's not a normal kind of diversity and inclusion story, but it actually proves out the point that those types of groups, when you bring people together to create a new sense of community, how you can have an impact broadly, and goes back to inclusion, which we really gave them a sense of inclusion in a new area, and also went back to retention because we didn't have a lot of people leave. A lot of people moved. They moved because they needed a job, I get it, but they stayed. And so we felt really good that we had given them a new sense of community in Atlanta.
Thank you. LaKesha?
Yeah, our employee business resource groups really have a voice. I would say our longest serving 25 years this year is our Pride EBRG, our LBGTQ, and they were instrumental in actually American Airlines being the first airline to come out about, LGBTQ rights. We were the first airline to provide same-sex partner benefits and the such. And so very proud of the work that our leaders and our Pride employees have done to really be the voice and be the consciousness of American. When the bathroom bill was being considered in the state of Texas, and I know it was considered in North Carolina, we're held accountable to making sure that we don't align ourselves with policies that are discriminatory. Right. Because if we do, we have to answer to over 130,000 team members. And so we were like, this bathroom bill is not good for the country, it's not good for people, it is not good for American Airlines. And so we talked to the local government officials and signed letters along with other corporations. So that's where our Pride EBRG. On the business front, I'm happy to say that we, as the world's largest airline that flies to over 61 countries, in order to do that and to do that well and be authentic when we come into a new place to do business, is making sure we tap into our employee business resource groups. So when we're expanding in Asia, and huge plug, please go on aa.com//newsroom and see all the new destinations that'll be starting. Shameless plug, not so shameless. But our employee resource groups are the ones that are working with our finance team to decide when is the right time to enter a new market, what the customs should be. When you're entering to a new country, you have to be very aware and mindful of the customs so you do not offend anyone. And so having multiple speakers on board, how the food that we provide, and so much so our Muslim EBRG had a lot of input into the new uniforms that will be rolling out next year. So our EBRGs are our consciousness. Mm-hmm. They are our partners. They collaborate with us because without them, we are not who we are, and we can't serve millions and millions of customers each and every day if we don't hear from them first.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
For me, on the PRSSA National Board, our board is actually very diverse this year. I think it was a little diverse last year, but it's super diverse this year. And so that's been really beneficial because when I've had an initiative that I wanted to push or I wanted to, make sure everyone was doing a specific idea, they were right on target with that. So for LGBTQ, we changed our logo to the rainbow for PRSSA National, and that was a big deal. And so I think PRSA ended up tagging along with us to change theirs as well. So we have different things that happen because we are so diverse.
That's great. Thank you. One last question, then we'll open it up to the floor for a bit. But I'm curious what your experience has been, the three of you, in the various settings you've worked in and in the university, in Adrienne's case, about goal setting, the importance of goal setting, the importance of having a strategy before you start building ERGs and you start doing all the things that we've been talking about, what role that upfront work has played, and any advice you might have for people in the audience.
So,
Yeah, go ahead. Yep, we'll work back that way.
So when it comes to my role as the VP, the inaugural VP, I had to set a platform. So I had 3 initiatives, or 3 main goals. And from those goals, I've actually implemented everything that you read in the booklet. The book club, which is a national book club. So when you're talking to people in public, sometimes people can get offended or they can feel a little shy when you maybe touch on something that hits their core. So the book club allows you to read stories of other individuals and kind of do that at home and then come back with a better face when you've discussed that topic. I've also, as I mentioned, created the subcommittee, and then we have one other initiative that was really important to me, and that was creating opportunities for tons of students. We have 60 students, multicultural students, who will get to participate in a one-on-one mentorship with a multicultural member of PRSSA or someone in the profession. And so that will launch, well, it's already launched, and they'll be paired by the end of the week. I'm here right now, but when I leave, I'll finish those pairings for you. So that was really important for me. I had a lot of mentors who helped me build my platform, mentors who are actually in the building, in the profession, to create my platform and help me make sure we achieve those goals.
Great, thank you.
When you're talking about goal setting, first of all, you have to start from a basic understanding of where you're starting from, right? Where you're at. Because every organization, whether it's education or corporate America, you're starting in different places. So be mindful of that. And then set goals that are realistic based on where you are and where you want to be. But make sure that when you're setting those goals, you have a diverse group of people at the table. In discussing those things. The importance of goals, though, is really about accountability at the end if you don't meet those goals. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people and a lot of organizations set goals. That's all great, and check the box, check the spreadsheet, whatever, wherever you keep it. But the accountability is what's important, because that's where if you have accountability and measure against that, when you're failing or not, what you need to change. And so just start from where you are, look at that, be honest about it, and then where you want to be, and make sure that you're turning along, and just those touch points along the way. And know that goals can be changed. Don't be so stagnant in this. You know that it evolves. D&I is a journey. So that would be my advice.
Thank you. Alicia?
So I once worked for a chief operating officer, and he would say every day, you move what you measure. You aren't going to have any impact or make any significant progress if you are not measuring and tracking exactly what you're doing. So move what you measure. And to the accountability perspective, I think it's important that you not only set goals, but you communicate them throughout the organization to that accountability, because your internal audiences should be just as important accountability partner as any external sources, the board, et cetera. So employees should also know the destination, and they should be expected to hold you accountable as well.
Thank you. Why don't we open it up to the floor now? Any questions that any of you have for the panel, please? I think there's a microphone over there.
My question specifically is for American Airlines, the company itself. When you're entering different factors, like doing international PR, and you're doing these policies and redoing all these internal works of the agency, how do you enter into some of these countries that might not be as progressive or as there yet, but still staying true to how we're moving?
That's a good question. So that's where you have to, we're not going to enter any country that it would be of detriment to customers. I mean, we've pulled out of countries where there's political unrest. But when you're talking about maybe some moral issues, our EBRGs will ring the bell for us, but at the end of the day, we are a for-profit company, and so sometimes you have to make those hard decisions about going into a place that, while it's not, violence is an issue, because we wouldn't do any of that, but you have to, at the end of the day, we are in business to serve all customers. And there's always going to be a need, and so we're aware of that. We'll discuss it. from a PR perspective, if we know we're going into a place that may be questionable, we'll have those discussions and really align with our EBRG to help us educate team members inside the building and all around our airports and stations. And then we'll deal with the public as needed. And that's where we'll leverage our government affairs team as well.
Thank you. To that point, I just wanted to mention that I think Dean mentioned during his talk about how there's a potential to commoditize diversity. But where the tension comes in if you're working for a for-profit company is that the management of any given company, and certainly every company I've been at, whether it's D&I, whether it's social impact, whether it's corporate social responsibility, the first question they ask is, what is it going to do to drive the bottom line? And so that's something that I think we still have a lot of work on, and I completely agree with you. But you know, the board and the management of any for-profit company is basically responsible to the shareholders of the company. And as long as you can at least initially show that some of these programs, whether it's D&I or some of the other things I've mentioned, will eventually return a profit, that will open the door to allow you to do other things that may not be as transactional in nature. So there was a question over here, I think.
Part anecdote, can you hear me? Okay, part anecdote, part question. So I'm Kevin at Ohio State, and we do diversity and inclusion trainings. And Jeff, something you said reminded me of something that I thought would be worth sharing with the group about bringing your full self to work and being proud of who you are and serving as a leader in that space. And what the group that did a training at Ohio, which is a swing state, and you know, maybe not as progressive a market as Chicago as used to, was really enlightening. They got quotes from people in these employee advocacy groups, and they printed them out on little pieces of paper. And then you sit in a room full of people that look more like me and have them read these quotes. And it was really eye-opening to see people read a quote from someone that says, like, I'm a director, I'm a black man, people are still afraid of me when I walk in the store in a hoodie. Or one was from a woman who said, people encourage me all the time that there's still time to find my husband and start a family. I'm a lesbian. And some quotes were long, some were short. But what happened, you go around the room, you kept reading these stories, and it struck everyone like it hit us like a ton of bricks. And I watched people who maybe hadn't considered or hadn't put themselves in the place of diverse audiences, like really it hit them hard. So I wanted to share that story. It's a long way to ask a question as well.
No, but thank you for sharing it. It's a very good point.
What other things have you seen that really help shift that culture, like the employee trainings? I've been in some really bad ones too. And I'm just curious to hear your perspectives on things that you've seen work well in corporate cultures and then things that haven't worked well.
LaKesha, do you want to?
Well, so we were kind of running parallel American Airlines and Starbucks after our public incidences. And, you know, we can't shut down the airline for 24 hours to do implicit bias training. But after what happened in October 2017, we did roll out implicit bias training. And what I will say is that out of with 130,000 team members, everyone has their biases and you have to be aware that there are some people's hearts and minds you're not going to change. And so when you understand that, that's the first step to training is to teach, and there's that accountability. It's more about HR and policies and did we provide that training? We've had those discussions. We're hearing from our team members. Some are, happy about taking the training, others are not, because implicit bias training particularly is it's a personal thing. And some people think they're not biased. Some people think they have a black friend, an Asian friend, a lesbian friend. They don't think they have these biases. So it's really getting at the heart of people, and that can be challenging and that takes time. But at the end of the day, for us at American, is that you are required to do implicit bias training annually, in person and online, because at the end of the day, when you guys step on board our planes, we are to care for you. The minute you purchase your ticket to the time you get your bag and meet your family, your loved one, or whomever, we are to take care of you on your journey with us. And so that is a responsibility we don't take lightly, because we have to validate the trust that you're putting in us to fly you the places where you want to go. And when we start with that, that is what we're in service of you and everyone else in this room and outside this room. And so that's how we've approached our team member training.
Great, thanks.
Kevin, I would say that in addition to that, leadership is a critical point. Leaders have to model exactly what the organization is going to be as it relates to D&I. If they're not modeling, how in the heck do you expect all of your employees and team members to get on board? No. So I think it's a bottom up, it's a top down, and sometimes top down becomes more of a requirement. So leaders truly have to believe it. They have to teach middle managers to believe it, and then you have to have to live and breathe it on every single team in the organization for it to truly have impact.
And at American, our leaders had to go through the implicit bias training first.
Yep.
I mean, they shut them down for a good 48 hours. So that, because like you said, it starts at the top.
Yeah.
And you have to know where you're starting from. I think,
right,
LaKesha,
baseline.
you mentioned that in a couple of companies I've been at, we did some extensive research with the members of the management committee and other levels of employees to see what the reality is, because what we thought was the case turned out to be something completely different, because we all have unintentional biases, right? I mean, we're human beings, so we all have that. But until those are uncovered, you don't know where you're beginning from. I think that the thing you also mentioned that's critical is a lot of this training, because of the nature of it, really needs to be in a room of people, a diverse room of people. It seems like, when I started my career many years ago to where we are now, everything shifted from in-person training to online now. And there's some topics, and I would dare to argue that D&I is one of those, where there's certain things you can do online, but until you have that conversation, until you do what you mentioned with those pieces of paper, you really don't get to the heart of what the issue is. And so any of you who have control over training at any of your organizations, I would just say, let's try to get people together in a room. It's not all about doing this online.
Well, and I meant to give credit to those people who shared those stories. It was back to your point, Jeff, because it can't be easy to tell those stories sometimes, but the people that were bold enough to do that really helped move the organization as a whole forward. So I think anyone in those seats that can share those stories, it really does make a difference.
Thank you. Other questions? Let's go over here. Yeah.
Hi, thanks so much for you're right behind me. Thanks for the conversation. I really appreciate it. We've heard a lot of great examples from really large corporations. I'm the VP of Communications and Engagement with a small nonprofit. We have a staff of 25. So I can't have our diverse employees with a big affinity group or any of those kinds of things. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on how to really move the needle on inclusion in a small organization. We're trying hard.
I would say collaboration with an organization that is diverse. So collaboration with a Black Professionals Network, or whatever represents your diversity in your team. And also, again, those universities. There are diverse students there who would love to work for a nonprofit after school. So making those residencies, as I mentioned before, would be my suggestion.
And I would say, if you have a really good HR professional, again, in bringing your authentic self to work each and every day, when you walk into your building, you're not leaving behind what you heard on the news. And one thing and Adela, she's not here, but what I like about what PwC did with both of John and Dallas was that they brought those team members at PwC in and had frank conversations. Because those team members were coming in after someone was shot dead in their home. And bringing them in and having that real conversation really started the dialogue for people to feel safe and secure that I can have these conversations in a small setting and be supported. So I would start there because, again, a lot is happening in this world, and we're all fooling ourselves if we think that when we cross that threshold into work, that we're leaving that behind. And I think with all the stuff that's happening, start there and let them know it's a safe space to have those conversations. And then naturally, organically, other conversations and topics will come up, and you just take it from there.
Alicia, do you have
I was going to say, safety and trust, because when you're with a small group, there's kind of a sense of family, but yet there's a little bit of angst about what I say in a small group. So I think safety and trust is really important as well.
I would also say that maybe partnering with other nonprofits that might be smaller, that are on the same journey as you are, rather than just doing it on your own. Even at bigger companies, I've seen the employee resource groups, for example, get together on a monthly basis or every other month or something with that same group at other neighboring companies to share stories and best practices. But certainly in the nonprofit world, there are a number of small nonprofits that probably are having the same conversations you are.
I think that's a great idea. Georgia has a Georgia Nonprofit Coalition, and they meet monthly, they have resources available to nonprofits, so maybe there's something like that in your community.
Thanks. Other questions over here? Does somebody have a microphone?
Hi, I'm Nisa Horowitz. I'm with Zeno Group. Jeff, earlier you made a joke about how can you do your job if you're a part of like 6 different employee resource groups, which was funny because it's true. So to the panel, do you have any experiences or insights or suggestions on how to approach those conversations about properly budgeting your time allocation, and also an actual budget for these employee resource groups?
Who would like to tackle that?
I like to hear about the budget too, so I'm going to look what this budget looking like?
Do you want to talk about that?
So clearly at Edelman, I had nothing to do with the budget. I had some input on the resource groups in the Atlanta office. So again, it comes down to revenue and et cetera, and you have to figure that out. But in terms of participation and time allocation, it was stated but unstated that you would be given time to be an active participant and member of these resource peer networks, because the agency saw so much value from them, and the more they took off and the more engagement the firm saw from them, the more approval you had to be active, engaged members. So I think it's just a matter of the leadership making a commitment to them and then giving employees the time. And again, starts at the top.
You definitely need a budget. You can't do the work without a budget. And that's showing real commitment to the work by making it a line item. So at American, our EBRGs we have 22 EBRGs. They all have a budget to support the events and the community outreach that they do. One of the things that I've really enjoyed over the last 2 years in support of the EBRGs is really amplify their work within the company, because it has been a really good recruitment tool. People are signing up to join EBRGs. But as a team member, as an individual, part of what your company owes you as an employee to retain you, to foster a very good work environment and culture for you, is to give you that time and support you in joining an EBRG. And so that's your birthright as an employee of that organization, is to be involved. And if there is no budget, some real frank conversations need to happen. And that is maybe going to your manager first, and that person having a conversation with, if it's, a lot of the work is done out of HR. But at American, one thing I'm very proud of is if they really have a seat. We cannot make a lot of our decisions without their partnership.
That's great.
again, I mean, we are a global airline. We need them. One of the things that over the past 2 years that we discovered is that African American women are the #1 group in travel. A lot of people did not know that.
I didn't.
And so, you know, and knowing that, and our Black Professionals Network, which is our African American EBRG, has really been instrumental in helping us identify future talent. We need more diversity in the front of the plane. And so when an EBRG is tapped in to real business objectives, it somehow becomes a part of your job. Every single day, you don't have to step outside and take a 30-minute lunch break to go do EBRG work if your boss is helping you naturally find the way to do that within everything that you're doing at work each and every day.
Okay, thank you. Was it over? No, I guess not. Okay, please.
Hi, I'm Cecilia Wong. I'm with Robert Shanwick. So, Jeff, when you started speaking, you had mentioned that AI is being discussed a lot in boardrooms, but then companies are very afraid to make a misstep. And then, Alicia, you keep saying that, made several points that it comes from the top down. In your experiences, what is the tipping point that gets companies and leadership over that fear and starting to do something about DEI?
Well, I'll start, and then I'd love to hear the viewpoint of our other panel members. In our case, it again goes back to the research that I mentioned before, that until we did, and it was very in-depth one-on-one interviews with each member of the management committee, and it was an outside firm because, you know, we were asking them to make themselves vulnerable and to talk about things that they weren't comfortable with. So it wouldn't have been right to have somebody within the company do this research. But the findings, and I know I was one of the people interviewed, and I mean, I tend to think I'm fairly open-minded and unbiased, but it pointed out all kinds of things that I have to work on. And so I think, again, just helping people realize where they are at personally, and then that obviously all ladders up to where the company is, because we're a composite of all of those individual experiences. But you have to, again, and I think LaKesha put it very well, you have to know where you're starting from. But what would the rest of you say?
Courage.
Courage?
Leaders can have data for days, but if you don't have a leader that has the courage to put a stake in the ground and say, we're committed to this and we're going to do it, and this is my expectation for the organization, I think it becomes a challenge. And then the second situation that often is the leverage is a negative incident that just makes it have to happen. Like, you don't have a choice. It's a reputational opportunity to turn things around or to get yourself out of a hole. I think it's sometimes the fulcrum that pushes everybody.
I think a couple of things. Everyone should owns D&I. It's not the D&I department. It's not your chief diversity officer.
Yes.
It is not your EBRGs. It is everyone in that company should have a role and responsibility when it comes to D&I. I like to tell people that I talk to is that the men in the room, and I'm going to take a minute, the white men in the room. When you step into a meeting and all you see are people that look like you, I encourage you to step out, grab someone that doesn't look like you, give them a seat at the table with you in that meeting. That's where it really, be an ally. Don't just talk about it, act it. Act it each and every day, because we all have an opportunity. If you walk into a room and it's not a lot of diversity in that room, be an ally of someone that's outside that room and give them a seat at the table. So it's everyone's responsibility. It's not just the leaders. It's very important, but it's everyone's responsibility. And when they accept that and are held accountable to making sure they are doing the work, that's how real change happens.
To that point, I was at one company who every year, every single employee, including the management, had a management objective that was D&I related. So at the end of the year, when you had your year-end review or mid-year, depending on the company's cycle, that was right there with business objectives, compliance objectives, all the other things that we're judged on and evaluated on. D&I was actually part of that. So by design, that forced people, and I remember there was quite a discussion when that first started because people were very uncomfortable about, you know, having their year-end bonus and their raise tied into this. But then it became accepted and just became the way we did business from that point on.
The same thing is happening with PRSSA. So a lot of our district conferences and our events all have to have that D&I component where we're able to share the message and move this forward.
That's great. I think we probably have time for one more question. Does anybody have I see a hand over here.
So my question was kind of on corporations who aren't acting on this yet and are waiting for a crisis to happen. How do we push to have it before the crisis actually happens?
So like my mom used to say, sometimes you just have to learn the hard way. Unfortunately, some revolutionary change happens because something really big had to happen.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just have to hit rock bottom with something major. And that's unfortunate because we're just focused on increasing the bottom line, giving return back to our shareholders. And D&I is usually the last thing. Sometimes it's not even in the equation. And you see that more now than ever over the last 4 or 5 years, that a lot of companies that are hiring these chief diversity officers is because a major incident had to happen. And what I will say to that is, we're all consumers in this room. You all have a voice. Use it. Don't spend your money there. If you have a bad experience, put it on Twitter. Sometimes you have to shake the tree in order to get the fruit to fall.
True.
I would say you do have those experiences, but then you do have things where, like, I had the D&I initiative for our students, and I was short a couple of mentors. So 60 students signed up, only about 24 mentors actually came through. And I had a meeting with Taylor in the back with Fin Partners, and she said, send me what you're missing. You're missing about 40 people. Let us work with our network, and we'll find the other 40 for you. So that's sometimes you have those opportunities where they haven't had an incident, they don't have anything necessarily going in terms of RBGs or anything like that, but they're willing to step up for an initiative to really get involved in the D&I space. So you do have those opportunities. So like we said before, speak up, you know, be the voice in the room.
My experience is that any company or organization is at a competitive disadvantage if they don't have something in place. And the employees will vote with their feet, as they say, and will leave and go to another company where they do have something much more progressive and much more inclusive. And so while that kind of moves into you don't do anything until there's an issue, I've seen that prompt a lot of activity, but never forget the collective power of the grassroots within any employee base, because it's the employees need to demand this. If it's not being done, then you know the employees that work for any given company need to be very vocal and very active and go to whoever their representative is that ultimately is on the management committee, because those voices are heard. And I've, again, been in enough boardrooms to know that sometimes that's all it takes, is that the employees saying, we want this, we need this, and that's what prompts some of this.
Thank you.
Okay, and we'll be around, except for LaKesha, who's
Sorry, I have to head to
got
San
an
Francisco.
airplane to catch, imagine that. She wouldn't tell me which airline, though.
That's an easy one.
So thank you, panel. It was a great conversation tonight.
Thank you.